The grand hall of Azure Prime was a spectacle like no other, a shimmering monument suspended in the vastness of space. Its translucent walls pulsed with the energy of distant stars, casting an eerie glow across the cavernous expanse. But it wasn't the architecture that held the galaxy's breath. It was the armor of Eros, resting at the center of the hall, an ancient relic said to be forged by forgotten civilizations, its power legendary. Around it stood a sea of alien species, all gathered for a ritual that spanned millennia. Each of them, a representative of the countless worlds that made up the galaxy, waited in anticipation, their collective gaze focused on the object of immense desire. The stakes were higher than ever before, for the armor was not just a prize. It was a symbol of dominance, a key to untold power. And yet, it had rejected them all. The insectoid Korshais stepped forward, their exoskeletons gleaming like polished obsidian, eyes glowing with determined malice. Their mandibles clicked as they prepared to reach out for the armor, but the moment their claws brushed the surface, a shockwave of energy erupted. The Korshai were sent flying back, their bodies slamming against the chamber walls with sickening force. The audience gasped, some in awe, others in disbelief. The whispers began. It's never accepted anyone. No species, no matter how advanced, can bond with it. Another alien, this time a gargantuan being composed of swirling gaseous clouds, drifted forward, tendrils of ionized light twisting in the air. With graceful movements, the creature extended a gaseous limb toward the armor. The room held its collective breath as the limb made contact, but as the energy field around the armor flared to life, the gaseous being was violently pulled back, its form scattering into sparks. Gasps echoed through the hall as the whispers grew louder. It has rejected them all, just as it always does. Each failed attempt added to the mounting tension. The next competitor, a towering crystalline entity, stepped forward, its surface flashing with brilliant colors as it moved. It was a being of perfect symmetry, its every motion precise. With slow, deliberate steps, it reached for the armor, the tips of its jagged, diamond-like limbs glowing as they neared the relic. The air crackled with a foreboding energy, and just as the first tendrils of connection formed, the armor recoiled violently, sending the crystalline being skittering across the floor with an unceremonious thud. A deadly silence settled over the hall. Even the most experienced among them began to wonder if anyone would ever claim the armor. The air grew thick with doubt, anticipation teetering on the edge of disbelief. There was a tension so palpable that it seemed to press in on the very walls of the hall. Then, from the back of the crowd, a soft rustle, barely perceptible, sounded. Heads turned. Eyes blinked. There, stepping into the circle with nothing but a simple, worn outfit and a quiet confidence, stood a human girl. She was small, unremarkable compared to colossal beings that surrounded her. Yet in that moment, the room went completely still. Her presence was like a spark in the dark, and the air seemed to change, as if the very fabric of reality had bent toward her. The silence deepened. The energy in the room shifted, the once passive armor now rippling with activity. It pulsed, as though sensing something new, something different. The faintest of hums radiated from it, subtle, yet unmistakable. The galaxy's eyes, once focused on the aliens who had tried and failed, now turned toward her. The whispers faded into breathless curiosity. The girl was walking slowly, her every step echoing in the silent hall. Was she here to fail like the others? Or was she something else? The armor stirred. The air shimmered with an electric charge. The moment had arrived. The chamber fell into an uncomfortable silence. As the massive beings from every corner of the galaxy took their positions, their eyes trained on the small human figure stepping toward the armor of Eros. In stark contrast to the towering, elegant beings that surrounded her, the girl was small, almost unremarkable. Her clothes were nothing like the ornate armors or elegant robes worn by the other contestants. She was dressed in a simple, worn jacket and trousers, her shoes scuffed and covered in dust from the long journey. Where the alien competitors had entered with quiet poise, each brimming with calculated confidence, the girl appeared almost casual, as though she were strolling through a marketplace rather than standing before the most coveted relic in the galaxy. Her long, unruly hair blew gently in the artificial wind, and her eyes, though full of wonder, held none of the hesitation seen in the other participants. She glanced up at the massive alien crowd, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips, as if amused by the sheer absurdity of the situation. Her movements were fluid, unhurried. No deep breaths, no meditation rituals. She wasn't preparing herself like the others. Instead, she adjusted the strap on her bag and muttered to herself under her breath, "I really hope this thing doesn't explode or something. That'd be awkward." A few alien spectators exchanged confused glances. She was either brave beyond measure or completely out of her depth. The armor at the center of the hall was waiting, just as it had for every other competitor. As the girl took another step forward, her fingers brushed the worn leather of her jacket, then quickly ran through her wild hair. She was entirely unbothered, radiating an energy completely different from the tense, calculated vibes of the others. One of the alien competitors, a hulking British warrior, glanced down at her and scoffed. "She doesn't even understand the significance of the moment," he muttered under his breath. "This is no place for a human." But the girl, hearing the muttered words, just shot him a playful grin. "Hey, I'm here to win this thing. You should probably take a seat, buddy," she said, her voice filled with casual confidence that sent a ripple of surprise through the crowd. She had no grand speech, no pomp and circumstance. Just a quick flick of her wrist, a glance at the armor, and a shrug. For all her nonchalance, something about her presence made everyone pause. It wasn't the elegance or power of her form. It was the ease with which she moved, unencumbered by the expectations and pressures that weighed down every other competitor. As she reached the center, the massive alien crowd continued to whisper amongst themselves. The girl, oblivious to the scrutiny, took one last glance at the armor of Eros before turning back to face the sea of species. She gave him a small wave, as if she were casually greeting old friends at a coffee shop. "Well," she said with a grin, "here goes nothing." Her relaxed, almost irreverent attitude contrasted so sharply with the intensity of the event that it was almost impossible to predict what would happen next. Was she truly a contender, or just a naive human playing at something beyond her reach? As her fingers reached out to touch the armor, the tension in the hall was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The rest of the galaxy's finest waited, holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Would the armor reject her, just like the others? Or had the universe just created a truly unexpected champion? The human girl stood in the center of the grand hall, her hand still hovering just above the armor of Eros. The silence that enveloped the room was suffocating, punctuated only by the whispers of the alien spectators who couldn't quite believe what they were witnessing. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation, and for a moment, it felt like the entire galaxy was holding its breath. But beyond the uncertainty of whether the armor would accept her, there was another, more immediate challenge, a challenge that could shatter any hopes of a victory before they even began. The ancient ritual that surrounded the armor of Eros had one rule above all. Only the most worthy could claim it, and only those who were able to pass the final trial could unlock its power. It was not a matter of strength or skill alone. It was about purity, tradition, and the ability to embody the ancient ideals of those who had created the relic. And here she was, an untested, unprepared human girl, without even the ceremonial garb that the others had spent years preparing for this moment. Her odds of passing the trial? Near zero. Across the room, standing in the shadows, was the one being whose presence cast a long, heavy shadow over every challenger, Grandmaster Xyrus. Xyrus was a legend, a being whose name had been whispered in reverence throughout the galaxy for centuries. He was the epitome of tradition, the embodiment of combat mastery, a being who had honed his skills over millennia, a warrior who was said to have defeated countless opponents in rituals just like this one, including every attempt to claim the armor of Eros. He was the last of his kind, a species that had long ago perfected the art of spiritual and physical alignment with the relic. His every movement was deliberate, fluid, and impossibly precise, his body radiating ancient power. His robes, woven from the finest threads of cosmic energy, shimmered as he surveyed the room. His icy blue eyes glinted with the wisdom of thousands of years of combat. As he observed the human girl, he merely nodded, an expression of disdain barely registering on his ageless face. She was nothing more than a passing curiosity, an outlier in this prestigious gathering. Foolish, he muttered to himself, his voice low but heavy with authority. A human can never claim the armor. Cyrus had seen it all. He had trained for lifetimes, refining his mind, body, and spirit to the point where no being, human or otherwise, could hope to match him. For years, he had been the uncontested master of the ritual. His reputation alone ensured that no one dared challenge his dominance over the armor. The odds were simple. The armor would choose him, just as it always had. The thought of a human succeeding was laughable, but there was more than tradition at play here. For Cyrus, the armor wasn't just a relic. It was a symbol of his mastery, of his unshakable hold over the galaxy's greatest power. If a human were to claim it, it would not only threaten his supremacy, it would dismantle everything he had worked for. Every legacy he had built would be reduced to dust in an instant. As the girl reached out to touch the armor, Cyrus stood motionless in the crowd, his piercing gaze fixed upon her. His fingers twitched ever so slightly, as if ready to intervene at any moment, to ensure that the test would go as it always had, according to the ancient ways. The tension in the air grew unbearable. The very foundations of tradition's strength and order seemed to be at stake. The girl, with her casual demeanor and unorthodox approach, was a wild card, an unpredictable force that no one had anticipated. And yet, as the crowd held its collective breath, the girl's hand made contact with the armor. The relic pulsed with energy, its once stagnant surface rippling with a force that sent a shock wave through the hall. For the first time in centuries, the armor didn't reject the touch. It responded, unpredictably, impossibly. Cyrus's jaw tightened, the weight of the moment settling like a storm cloud in his chest. He had not expected this. The odds had been in his favor. He had been the chosen one, the one who embodied the ancient ways. Yet now, before his eyes, everything he believed in was at risk. The ritual had begun, and there would be no turning back the moment the human girl made contact with the armor arrows. The entire hall seemed to freeze, the room filled with a strange, buzzing hum. But while the galaxy's finest warriors and mystics were staring in shock, trying to process the unprecedented event unfolding before them, the girl remained completely unfazed. No awe, no fear, just a calm, almost bemused smile as the relic pulsed to life. As the armor's ancient energies began to swirl around her, others in the chamber continued to stare with wide, disbelieving eyes. But instead of standing in reverence or carefully attuning herself to the relic's power, the girl did what she did best. She cracked a joke. Is this it? I expected a little more fanfare. She glanced around, hands on her hips. Are we supposed to start dancing or something? A few of the more refined alien spectators raised an eyebrow, confused by the casual tone in which she addressed a moment of such monumental significance. A nearby Parthenian sage, an ancient being covered in layers of swirling tattoos that radiated cosmic energy, blinked his 3 eyes in disbelief. What did she just say? One of his disciples whispered, visibly baffled. She's touching the armor, and she's making jokes? The girl, still with her hand resting on the armor, spun around to face the crowd. She winked, adding, Come on, folks, we've all seen this play out 1,000 times. Can we just skip to the part where I win and head out for lunch? Her voice, light-hearted and irreverent, was a complete opposite of everything the galaxy's elite warriors had expected. The other competitors, who had spent years meditating, training, and perfecting every movement, could only stare at her with a mixture of disbelief and discomfort. Her behavior defied every convention they had been taught to revere. Cyrus, who had spent centuries refining his connection to the armor, adjusted the intricate folds of his robes and watched her with barely contained annoyance. He wasn't sure what to make of this human. She wasn't here to follow the rules. She wasn't here to impress anyone with elaborate gestures or dignified humility. No, she was here for something else, something unpredictable, and that made her all the more dangerous. Meanwhile, the girl, oblivious of the tension around her, took a few steps back from the armor, sizing it up with a tilted head. She checked her wrist, as though reading a watch that wasn't there. Well, this is awkward, she muttered. Anyone have a snack? I didn't realize this was going to take so long. She glanced over at Cyrus, then grinned. You think they have coffee around here? I'm kind of in the mood for something strong. The energy rippling through the armor responded to her casual indifference, as if to acknowledge her defiance. The galaxy's finest warriors, the ones who had spent their entire lives respecting the ritual, couldn't help but be thrown off by her effortless charm. She wasn't taking anything seriously. She wasn't showing fear or reverence. She wasn't following the rules. And it was confusing them all. Confused, the Fury floated in place, helpless as the girl grinned. Next time, maybe get a stronger signal? As the Fury dropped to ground, the crowd roared with laughter. It was clear now. This wasn't just some accidental fluke. The human girl had something none of her opponents had counted on: unpredictability. In every match, her bizarre, off-the-wall methods weren't just working, they were winning. And as the crowd cheered, it became painfully clear to the others that this human, with her unorthodox style, might just be a force to be reckoned with. Xyrus had seen it all. A lifetime of training, battles fought in the deepest reaches of the galaxy, and countless victories had earned him the title of the greatest combatant across the stars. He'd mastered every style, every technique, and had faced down enemies from every species imaginable. The rules of combat were sacred, etched into the very core of intergalactic tradition. There were formulas to follow, rituals to honor, and a time-honored dance of attack and defense that governed every match. But this human, this girl, was shattering those expectations with every step. He stared at the screen, his sharp, crystalline features locked in an expression of disbelief. He had watched her battles over and over again, studied the footage, reviewed every moment. She was so unorthodox, so imperfect. It defied everything he knew about combat. Her moves were chaotic, disorganized. There was no strategy in her approach, no consideration of the ancient principles that had shaped combat across the galaxy. It was as if she was making it all up as she went along. No respect for the art, no honor in her actions. She didn't adhere to the unspoken rules. She didn't even follow the basic rituals that had been followed for millennia. Xyrus clenched his fists, his translucent skin flickering with patterns of agitation. "This is absurd," he muttered to himself, pacing in the confines of his private quarters. How can a being so disjointed, so human, possibly stand a chance against warriors of such great tradition? He replayed the footage of her second match again, the one against the Gither 9. The Crystal Warrior's pride had been shattered in an instant when she deflected the light beams with nothing but a handheld mirror and a pair of sunglasses. The crowd had laughed, but Xyrus had felt the sting of that moment, a deep frustration building within him. The audacity of it. He had watched her next match with a mix of fascination and annoyance. The telepathic Fury, a creature who could bend minds to its will, had failed utterly against the girl. The human had defeated it, not with physical prowess, but by doing the unthinkable. She had overwhelmed it with chaos. Her mind was too unpredictable, too disorderly for the Fury to control, and was defeated not by strength, but by its own inability to adapt. Xyrus growled, his thoughts racing. She's breaking the game. In a way, she wasn't even following the traditional path of combat. She wasn't playing by the established rules. But it was more than that. It wasn't just that she was different. It was that she was undermining the very essence of what made combat meaningful. The elegance, the discipline, the strategic beauty that had been passed down for generations. Every fight, every movement, was a manifestation of centuries of perfected technique. And this human girl, with her ridiculous tricks and reckless abandon, was turning it all upside down. He could see it now, the growing realization gnawing at the edges of his mind. She's not just defying tradition, she's erasing it. There would be no more respect for the ancient ways if she continued like this. There would be no more reverence for the ritual of combat. Her presence in the tournament, her very existence here, was a threat to the foundation of everything he had known. Xyrus paused, the realization hitting him with full force. She wasn't just an underdog. She wasn't just a distraction or a mistake. She was a challenge to the very fabric of what the galaxy believed combat should be, a revolution. And that, more than anything, terrified him. If she wins... Xyrus's voice trailed off, his thoughts spinning as he tried to comprehend the impossible. The system, the sacred structure of combat, would crumble. The honor of the tournament, The significance of every battle would become meaningless. The galaxy's finest warriors would no longer be revered for their discipline or dedication. All of it would be tossed aside for what? Chaos? A joke? I will not let that happen, Zyrus whispered to himself, his voice steady despite the rising tide of anxiety. His long fingers twitched, and he could feel the pressure building behind his eyes, his mind already planning. There was no turning back now. He would defeat her, no matter the cost. As the tournament drew nearer to its final rounds, Zyrus made his way to battlefield, his resolve hardening like the ancient crystals that made up his body. He was a master of his craft, bound by the traditions that had shaped him. He would fight with everything he had, against this human girl, against the very tide of change she represented. And when the battle came, he would show her what true combat was. The old ways would prevail. They had to, but deep down, something gnawed at him, a whisper of doubt that he couldn't quite shake. Was she really the one who needed to be defeated? Or was it the tradition itself that needed to be challenged? But there was no time for that now. Zyrus could only focus on one thing: victory. Because if he didn't win, the galaxy would never be the same again. The tension in the air was palpable as the final rounds of the tournament of Xenos approached. The grand arena, floating in the void above Nexus Prime, seemed to pulse with a strange energy. 100 species had gathered, their voices melding into a cacophony of anticipation. All eyes were on the unexpected star of the competition, the human. Spectators from every corner of the galaxy leaned forward in their seats, incredulous murmurs rippling through the crowd. The betting odds, which had once seemed so reliable, now flashed across holographic boards with a single message: error does not compute. It was the ultimate anomaly. No one, not even the most advanced algorithms, could account for the improbable rise of this human girl who had no business being here. The final match was mere hours away, and the whispers of disbelief had only grown louder. How could someone with so little experience in the traditional ways of combat, someone who didn't follow the rules, didn't respect the art, have made it this far? As the humanoid spectators from every race exchanged looks of bafflement, others leaned in with curiosity, eager to see just how far this chaos would go. For most, it was still hard to believe that a human with no formal training had survived battles against some of the deadliest creatures known to exist. They had witnessed her unorthodox methods, her distractions, her improvisation, her sheer unpredictability. And now, with every victory, they found themselves questioning everything they had once believed about the sacred traditions of combat. In the contestant prep room, Adrian stood in the middle of the floor, wearing the same standard Federation Navy workout clothes he'd worn from the start. He wasn't meditating like the others. He wasn't fine-tuning his equipment or running through strategy. Instead, he was just waiting, casually waiting. Around him, the seasoned warriors and combat experts were preparing, each one in their own way, some running simulations, others focusing deeply on their techniques. They didn't know what to make of this human. Was she brave, naive, a distraction to the higher-level competition? Or was she something more, something dangerous? His opponent, Zyrus, stood just across the room, his glistening crystalline body reflecting the overhead lights. He was a picture of focus and discipline, his every move calculated, his every breath measured. There was no room for deviation, no margin for error in his strategy. Zyrus was the embodiment of perfection, a fighter who had won every battle for centuries, a being whose very presence demanded respect. And then there was Adrian, a human, a wild card. He glanced around the room at his fellow competitors, who had all mastered their respective arts. There was no hesitation in their eyes, only unwavering confidence. Yet here, amidst the quiet tension, Adrian's demeanor remained unchanged. He was the only one not tense with the weight of the coming battle. One of the officials, a tall being made entirely of shifting shadow, leaned in close to another competitor and whispered, "Do you think the human can really pull this off?" The competitor, a fearsome Serity warrior with armored plating across her chest, shook her head with a snort. No technique, no discipline. She's bound to fail in the finals. But despite their doubts, Adrian continued to advance, defeating opponents who, by all accounts, should have torn him apart. He had no weapon, no formal combat training. His movements were erratic, yet somehow he kept winning. It was almost as if the very chaos of his approach was throwing his opponents off balance, making their predictable, honed techniques seem useless. As Adrian walked into the final preparation chamber, the air buzzed with whispers. His path had been anything but conventional, more like an unpredictable tornado that tore through every form of battle known to the galaxy. The contestants around him glared, wondering how long he could keep defying the odds. Could his luck hold out? Was he truly a genius of some unknown combat style? Or was this all an elaborate fluke? Xyrus, the final and most respected combatant in the tournament, stood at the center of the arena. His confidence was unwavering, his eyes locked on the human who had just entered. Xyrus knew that today everything would change. He couldn't allow this human to continue to defy the traditions, to disrupt the sacred art of combat that had been passed down for millennia. He had to stop her. As the announcer's voice rang out across the arena, the crowd fell into silence. The anticipation thickened the air. The final match had begun. It wasn't just a battle for the championship. It was a battle for the future of combat itself. Adrian Chun, the announcer intoned, the first human ever to make it this far in the tournament of Xenos. And facing him, Xyrus, the undefeated crystal warrior who has conquered every opponent for over 300 years. The crowd erupted into cheers, some in excitement, some in disbelief. But one thing was clear. They were all waiting to see how this impossible showdown would play out. Would the humans' bizarre tactics finally meet their match? Or was this about to be the ultimate upset? Adrian stood there, calm, almost amused. He didn't even seem to notice the massive stakes. The entire galaxy was watching. But to him, this was just another match. Just another opportunity to prove that chaos could be just as effective as precision. As he met Xyrus's gaze, he gave a small shrug, a grin tugging at the corners of his lips. "Let's see what happens," he said, his voice carrying through the arena, sending ripples of confusion through the spectators. The odds were stacked against him. Tradition was on the line. Yet, for the first time in the tournament's long history, it felt like anything was possible, and the stakes had never been higher. The air crackled with anticipation as Adrian Chun and Xyrus stood at the center of the vast arena, the final showdown of the Tournament of Xenos just moments away. All around them, the massive crowd fell silent, their eyes fixed on the two combatants. Xyrus stood tall and regal, his crystalline form glowing under the arena's lights. His every movement was precise, controlled, a perfect execution of thousands of years of combat tradition. He was a picture of tradition, cold, calculating, and implacable. Every fighter had bowed to the sanctity of his disciplined methods, and now, standing across from him, was the one person who refused to conform to anything. Adrian, the human who defied every expectation, was dressed in the same Federation Navy workout clothes he'd worn throughout the tournament. No elaborate armor, no weapon, just a pair of worn sneakers and a grin that seemed to have no place in such a serious competition. He stretched his arms casually, popping his neck before taking his stance. There was no mistaking the contrast between them. Xyrus, the embodiment of calculated perfection, versus Adrian, the master of unpredictable chaos. Xyrus's eyes narrowed. He was used to dealing with warriors who followed the rules, who understood the ancient traditions. But Adrian was a force that did not play by any script. The announcer's voice echoed throughout the arena. The final battle begins now. Round 1, the opening move. Xyrus moved first. His body flowed with a grace that could only be described as art. He unleashed a flurry of crystalline blades that spiraled through the air with deadly precision, aimed directly at Adrian. The crowd gasped at the fluidity of his attack. So sharp, so fast, that the blade shimmered like light reflecting off an ocean. Adrian didn't move. He simply stood there, eyes twinkling, lips curling into that same half-smile. At the last second, Adrian dropped to ground, rolling smoothly underneath the oncoming blades. It was the most unexpected move. The entire arena collectively held its breath. Xyrus, who had anticipated an evasive move, watched in disbelief as Adrian came up on the roll, grinning like he'd just gotten away with something. "Is that all?" Adrian shouted, his voice echoing off the stone walls of the arena. clearly mocking precision and danger of the attack. Cyrus's eyes flared with frustration. He had prepared for the best, and yet this human was laughing. He shifted his stance, eyes narrowing with focus as he prepared for the next onslaught. Round 2. Tradition meets chaos. Cyrus moved with lightning speed, the energy around him shimmering as he summoned the crystal cyclone, a whirl of razor-sharp shards spinning toward Adrian in a spiral of destructive force. The spectators were on the edge of their seats. No one had ever seen an attack like this before. This was tradition. This was what the great Cyrus had perfected over centuries. Adrian, unfazed, pulled out his phone from his pocket and tapped a few buttons. A soft beep echoed through the arena. "What are you doing?" Cyrus growled. Without answering, Adrian hit the play button. Suddenly, the sound of upbeat electronic dance music blasted from the phone's tiny speakers. The beat reverberated through the arena as Adrian began to dance. The crystal cyclone raged toward him, but Adrian didn't flinch. Instead, he performed an exaggerated moonwalk, sliding backwards smoothly as the crystalline shards whizzed by, missing him by inches. His movements were clumsy yet fluid, like someone having fun at a party rather than engaged in life-or-death combat. Cyrus's eyes twitched. This human, he was toying with him. But then, in a moment of confusion and rage, Cyrus created a blinding light at the center of the cyclone. The light exploded in all directions, filling the air with a haze of shimmering energy. The crowd gasped as the light blazed brighter and brighter, preparing to wash over Adrian. But in the next moment, the light faded. Adrian had vanished. Round 3, the unexpected turn. The crowd murmured in panic, unable to see where Adrian had gone. Cyrus's gaze darted across the arena, his crystalline eyes scanning for any movement. And then, boom! Adrian exploded from the ground, launching himself upward with a dramatic leap that defied logic. He was standing on top of a massive chunk of rock, a smug look on his face as he waved at the audience. "Miss me!" he shouted. Cyrus's rage bubbled over. He lunged toward Adrian, his body surging with force. But Adrian was already moving, his body twisting midair in ways that should have been impossible for a human. He slid down the rock, diving to the side just as Cyrus's massive form crashed into it, his attack skimming past Adrian's leg by mere centimeters. Adrian landed gracefully, rolling to his feet with an exaggerated spin. He struck a dramatic pose. "You know, I think I'm getting the hang of this," he grinned, as if he were in the middle of a friendly sparring match instead of facing a being of immeasurable power. Cyrus, now utterly perplexed and angered, charged forward once again, his every movement full of fury. But Adrian didn't seem scared. Instead, he gave a lazy yawn. All right, he said, tapping his phone again. The music switched from energetic dance beats to a slow, orchestral piece, perfectly timed to the chaos surrounding them. "Let's do this." Round 4, the final move. Adrian's unpredictability reached its peak when, instead of avoiding Cyrus's next attack, he charged headlong into it. Cyrus's crystalline spikes shot out from his body, aiming to pierce through Adrian's chest. But Adrian, with a grin that seemed more at home in a bar than a battlefield, dove through the oncoming attack, turning Cyrus's own momentum against him. In a move that seemed completely unthinkable, Adrian grabbed Cyrus's arm in midair, using the momentum to twist him to the ground. The arena fell into a stunned silence. Adrian stood over Cyrus, panting but grinning. "Well," Adrian said, looking down at his opponent, who lay stunned, his form flickering with disbelief. "I guess I'm a new champion now, huh?" The arena erupted in cheers. A human, had defeated the ancient crystal warrior. Against all odds, against all tradition, Adrian had won. But as the crowd roared, Adrian's gaze lingered on Cyrus for a moment longer. There was no triumph in his eyes, only a wry smile. He had done the impossible, not through perfection, but through something far more unpredictable and powerful, his own unorthodox, chaotic brilliance. And as the arena echoed with the sound of victory, one thing was clear. Everything had changed. The galaxy would never see combat the same way again. Adrian stood at the center of the arena, sweat trickling down his brow, but his smile never faded. The crowd's roar was deafening, a mixture of disbelief, awe, and unbridled excitement. He had done the impossible. He had defeated Xyrus, the crystalline combat master, who had been undefeated for centuries. His methods, unpredictable, chaotic, and wildly unorthodox, had shattered everything the Tournament of Xenos had stood for. He hadn't relied on perfect technique, the rigorous tradition of alien martial arts, or centuries of training. No, Adrian had used something far more human: adaptability, humor, and the willingness to take risks no one else would dare. As the announcer declared him the winner, Adrian glanced at Xyrus, who now stood at the edge of the arena, his form flickering with the soft glow of defeat. Xyrus had been the embodiment of the old ways, the ancient traditions that ruled his galaxy, yet it was Adrian's impromptu, chaotic style that had outlasted him. Xyrus, though beaten, stood tall, his crystalline form shimmering with an almost imperceptible humility. He gave Adrian a look, not a hostility, but something else: contemplation. The arena gradually quieted as the final moments of the tournament drew to a close. The high-ranking officials, the spectators, the alien competitors, they all watched Adrian as though they had just witnessed an event that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. His victory wasn't just over Xyrus. It was over the very idea of what combat could be. As Adrian stood there, basking in his victory, his eyes met those of the other competitors. Alien beings who had once believed in the superiority of tradition. Now their eyes held something new: curiosity, uncertainty, a questioning of everything they had believed was true. Adrian's methods had defied every standard. He hadn't been the strongest, the fastest, or the most disciplined, but he had been the most unpredictable. And in a universe where perfection was worshipped, it was that very unpredictability that had led him to victory. As the crowd began to disperse, Adrian walked toward Xyrus. He didn't gloat. Instead, he offered a hand, an unexpected gesture of respect for the warrior who had fought him with all his might. Xyrus took a long moment, his crystalline form shifting with deep thought, before he extended his own arm and clasped Adrian's. The crowd watched in stunned silence, as if witnessing a paradigm shift in real time. "You've changed the game," Xyrus said slowly, his voice steady but tinged with admiration. Adrian chuckled, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "Guess I just didn't read the manual, huh?" he replied with a wry grin. Xyrus's gaze softened. "You broke the mold," he said quietly. "Perhaps it was time." Adrian nodded, his expression thoughtful for a moment. "Yeah, sometimes you gotta bend the rules to make your own path." As the two of them stood there, hands still clasped, Adrian reflected on everything that had brought him to this moment. The journey from Earth to the Tournament of Xenos had been one of sheer unpredictability, one that had pushed him to the limits of human ingenuity and instinct. And now, standing on the precipice of this new reality, Adrian realized that it wasn't about proving humans were superior to aliens. It was about showing that there was room for new methods, for evolution in combat, and maybe even in life. The old ways had worked for millennia, but Adrian had proven something undeniable. Tradition has its limits. Innovation is limitless. And as he turned toward the exit, the arena slowly emptying behind him, Adrian couldn't help but think about the future. The future of combat, the future of the galaxy, and the future of humanity's place among the stars. One of the crystalline competitors, a being made entirely of shimmering quartz, vibrated in a way that was almost like laughter. The energy pulses from his body began to synchronize with the girl's movements, as though her carefree attitude was somehow contagious. Another alien, a hulking warrior from the planet Gather, shook his massive head in disbelief. "She's treating this like a game," he muttered to a fellow competitor. "Does she even understand what's at stake here?" But the girl only shrugged, still smiling. "Maybe I do, or maybe I'm just here for the experience. Either way, let's hope this doesn't end with me being sent home in a spaceship-shaped box." With that, she gave the armor one last look, then turned her attention back to the crowd. "Right. Okay, let's get this show on the road, huh?" Her flippant attitude contrasted so starkly with the tense, serious competitors around her that the entire atmosphere in the room seemed to shift. Some were visibly unsettled, unsure how to react to the unanticipated human presence. Others began to whisper among themselves, amused by her unpredictability. No one expected her to win. No one thought she could possibly succeed. But the girl wasn't concerned about what others thought. For her, this wasn't about following tradition or honoring some ancient rite. It was about seeing what would happen when the rules were thrown out entirely. And in that moment, the human girl wasn't just a challenger in a tournament. She was an anomaly, one that could either change everything or send the galaxy into chaos. The tournament had begun, and the air was thick with anticipation as the first round of battles commenced. The human girl, still wearing the same relaxed, casual expression, stepped into the arena, facing her first opponent, a Phyrexian gladiator known for his unmatched speed and precision. The Phyrexians were famed throughout the galaxy for their agility and ruthless efficiency, honed through centuries of war and combat. As the battle horn blared, the Phyrexian circled the girl, his 6 limbs moving in a fluid, calculated rhythm. His glossy, insectoid eyes locked onto her every movement, calculating the perfect moment to strike. But the human girl wasn't even looking at him. Instead, she was busy pulling out a small device from her pocket, tapping a few buttons on the screen and muttering to herself. "Come on, where's the app?" "I swear I downloaded it," she grumbled. Her back turned to the gladiator as she scrolled through her device, completely unconcerned with the looming predator circling her. The Phyrexian's antennae twitched, his patience wearing thin. With a snarl, he lunged toward her, aiming to strike with a flurry of razor-sharp limbs. The girl spun around just in time, slapping the device in her hand with an exaggerated flourish. A small holographic image of a laser pointer appeared, projected from the device onto the floor directly in front of the Phyrexian's feet. "Got it!" she yelled triumphantly, her finger pressing the button as the laser danced across the arena. The Phyrexian, eyes locked on the red, suddenly halted mid-lunge. His instincts kicked in, and his body jerked in confusion as he swiped futilely at the tiny laser. His speed, once his greatest strength, became his downfall. He skidded across the floor, his limbs tangling in a wild, disorienting spiral as a human laughed. The crowd watched in disbelief as the Phyrexian's frantic movements grew more and more erratic, unable to resist the temptation of the glowing red. The girl, completely unbothered, casually checked her device one last time before pocketing it and looking back at the opponent, who was now on the ground, rolling in a tangled heap. "Seriously?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "That's all it took?" With a final, disorienting spin, the Phyrexian collapsed, his multiple legs tangled beneath him in a confused mess. The audience exploded into laughter, and the girl simply shrugged and dusted off her hands, the absurdity of the situation not lost on her. "That was way easier than I thought," she muttered, as the Phyrexian struggled to regain his composure, now thoroughly embarrassed. Her second opponent, a Gither 9, was a towering, crystalline entity known for its ability to refract light and create deadly beams of concentrated energy. The creature floated gracefully in the air, the crystalline shards of its body shimmering as it projected an aura of formidable power. The Gither 9's challenge wasn't just physical. It was a battle of willpower and mental acuity. The creature was capable of disorienting its foes with blinding flashes of light, creating dissonant sound waves that could scramble thoughts and senses. As the battle began, the Gither 9 raised its arms, and the air crackled with the power of the refracted light beams. The crowd tensed in anticipation, waiting for the spectacle that was about to unfold. But the girl wasn't looking at the creature at all. She was crouched down in the corner, rummaging through her pack, clearly searching for something. "Just a second. Almost got it," she muttered under her breath. The Gither 9 let out a low, resonating hum, sending out an explosion of light waves toward her. But before the rays could hit, she whipped out a pair of simple sunglasses and slapped them on, blocking out the dazzling, refracted beams. "All right, now we're ready," she called, giving a thumbs up to the crystal being, who appeared to pause in confusion. With a smile, she took a casual step forward. "You really think that'll mess with me?" With a flick of her wrist, she pulled out a small handheld mirror and angled it toward the Gither 9. The beam of light bounced harmlessly off the mirror, ricocheting back at the Gither 9 itself. The creature, caught completely off guard, had no time to react. The beam struck its own body, causing the crystalline figure to collapse to the ground in a spectacular shower of sparkles and energy flashes. The girl stared at the fallen opponent with a raised eyebrow. You know, I really thought you'd be tougher than that. Next time, try switching up your light show. I'm a sucker for new tricks. Her third match came swiftly, and the stakes rose. The girl now faced a telepathic fury, a species known for their ability to read minds and control weaker-willed beings with mere thought. The fury floated effortlessly above the ground, their deep purple skin shimmering with power. Their large, liquid eyes shimmered as they stared directly into the girl's face, preparing to invade her mind. The girl, however, wasn't fazed. She simply yawned, rubbing her eyes as the fury's telepathic tendrils began to curl around her mind. "Oh, no, you don't," she muttered, completely unperturbed. "You can't mess with this brain. It's a mess already." The fury hesitated, puzzled. It couldn't find an entry point. Her mind was too chaotic, too disorganized. The alien's telepathic force recoiled, struggling to maintain control. "Oh, now I get it," the girl said aloud, snapping her fingers. "You're trying to read my thoughts, but there's so much random junk in here that your powers can't even make sense of it. Well, sucks to be you." With a single fluid motion, she launched a small EMP grenade from her belt. The device whirred to life and sent a wave of disruption over the entire arena, short-circuiting the Fury's telepathic abilities. He'd just started a revolution, one that didn't rely on following the rules but on rewriting them. "I wonder what's next," Adrian mused aloud, his voice almost drowned out by the fading cheers. And somewhere, deep in the vast expanse of the galaxy, the universe held its breath, waiting for humanity to show it what it could do next as Adrian stepped through the exit, the door sliding shut behind him with a soft hiss. The weight of the victory settled into a quiet hum of satisfaction. He wasn't just a victor today. He was a symbol of change, of evolution, of the unexpected brilliance of humanity. Yet even as the crowd's echoing cheers faded into the distance, there was something in the air, an electric sense that this was only the beginning. Across the galaxy, whispers of the human who had cracked the armor, who had defied all tradition, spread like wildfire. The once proud alien factions, having witnessed the unorthodox tactics of Adrian Chun, now faced an unsettling reality. The arena's grandmasters convened in secret. The Council of Ancient Warriors, once united in their belief that tradition was unbreakable, now questioned everything. They had all been spectators, but Adrian had forced them to realize something far more important. Their time might be coming to an end. Back on Earth, a lone message blinked across military channels. One down. How many more will it take? Far beyond the stars, in the vast expanses where the unknown waits, other human soldiers began to prepare. They weren't just taking up arms. They were taking up a new philosophy, a new way of combat. They were the next wave. The universe was about to learn that humanity wasn't just another species to be conquered. It was one to change everything. And somewhere, in a hidden chamber, Adrian Chen's smirk appeared on a screen. His final words a challenge to anyone who thought they could stop what had already begun. Bring it on. To be continued. Don't forget to subscribe for more epic stories and future adventures. And if you enjoyed this journey, leave a comment below. Let me know what you think and what you'd love to see next.